Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, Robert Meyer Burnett, and welcome back to the KURLAN NAISKOS, the Picard Season 3 after show. This is Episode 9, VOX, an episode that I think made all middle-aged men cry all across America. And to tell us how this happened, I have writer, producer, Sean Tretta with me here on the show. Sean, thanks for being here. I know you're getting on a jet plane soon, but we do appreciate your time, and I really appreciate you carving out some time. I got to tell you, man, this show has been blowing me away, and this is now the 5th time I've seen VOX. I saw it in earlier incarnations, and watching it again, it was funny. I was watching it with my girlfriend, and she's a Star Trek fan, and she turns to me and she goes, "How can this be it? There's only one more episode? How is that possible?" And I'm so glad that you came on. You're a veteran, Terry Metalis veteran. You guys worked together on 12 Monkeys, and you've been working on
our 5th season of television together. Yeah,
5th season of TV, and between that, you were on Mayans. You were the co-executive producer of Mayans, another great show.
Worked on Mayans. Yeah, I had the. It's funny because we shoot Picard in Santa Clarita, California, which just so happens to be where I live. And Mayans actually shot across the street from Picard. So my commute changed all of 30 seconds, which was pretty great.
Did you ride your bike to work?
I did not ride my bike to work. I'm that lazy, but yeah.
Now you have a pretty interesting, you were producing horror films and things like that. You've edited. You've done a lot of things within the industry. How did you get your start here in the old Hollywood land?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was born in the Valley in San Fernando Valley in California. Grew up here, and then my family moved to Arizona. So I lived in Arizona. I was going to ASU, and I wanted to be a filmmaker since I was 5 years old. And at the time, ASU didn't have a film program, so I just bought a camera, got some friends together, and we made like a horror movie in the desert for $2,000. And we were halfway through shooting it, and we looked at each other and we're like, maybe we should stop. This isn't going to be good. But we kept on. We finished it, and I cut it together. And I'm like, well, if we had a little bit of this, and I did some of this here, it might pull together. And next thing you know, we're playing at film festivals in New York, and I got distribution on it. And I had to, I was worried that people would laugh at it. And then eventually, years later, I had to write a letter to the English censor board, promising them that the things in the movie weren't real. So that's how I got my start. I made another movie for $7,000 that, and these are features. These are feature lengths. That was on Netflix for a long time. And I just sort of kept making them. And then I got to a point where I had like 3 feature scripts optioned out to different places at the same time. Like, one of these is going to go. And I had people call me up and they're like, quit your day job. We're going to make this in next month. And then 6 months would go by. And, I'm working like a regular day job. And someone's like, you should try writing a TV pilot. And I never really thought of that before because I was like a movie guy. And I'm like, well, I had this idea, and so I wrote it in a month. I had this manager who worked out of his car, but he was in LA, so that was a big plus. And he called me up one day and he said, I got it to somebody at Imagine Entertainment. They said they would read it. They read it that same day, and they want to option it. So next thing I knew, I'm in the offices of Imagine. I desperately needed an agent. And no one would sort of take me because I had no credits other than the tiny little movies that I made. And now suddenly I have Imagine optioning my pilot script, and they're like, oh, you need an agent? We'll make some calls for you. And next thing you know, I had a pick of these top agents. So it was crazy.
Wow.
So I get these agents, and then a couple, they're like, this was like around the holidays and of that year. And they said, you should come out in a few months for staffing seasons on all these different shows. And I came out and I met on 12 Monkeys, which was gearing up for its first season. They just had the pilot script, and I think we had a draft of episode 2 and then episode 4. And And, you know, I got hired as a staff writer along with Chris Monfett, who worked on, you know, Picard 2. And so I got the job, and it, you know, changed my life. I moved out from Arizona with my family, and, you know, knock on wood, have been working in, you know, TV and movies ever since.
Well, so what was it like meeting Terry? Was Terry the first showrunner that you had met and dealt with?
Uh, well, it was interesting because Terry had co-created 12 Monkeys with Travis Fickett, and since they had never ran a show before, we there was a supervising producer who you know was technically our showrunner. So when I met with them, I met with Natalie Chaidez was her name, Terry, and Travis, and I'd heard, I think I'd heard Terry and Travis on a podcast for something else, and I knew that our sensibilities were the same just based on things that, you know, we talked about. You know, I got the gig, and we were in the room, and the one, I mean, there's many wonderful things about, you know, 12 Monkeys. And if all you Picard fans out there, if you like season 3, go watch 12 Monkeys, because that's sort of our storytelling style. But it was just this really wonderful creative opportunity where, you know, Terry and Travis and Natalie were like, if you got ideas, let's hear. You know, even though like Chris and I were just staff writers, we're like the lowest level guys, you know, in that room. It was like, if you got a great idea is a great idea. And we were really allowed to, you know, flourish on that show. And we got to do really amazing things. I mean, there was a point in our final season where I think I had a day. I was in the Czech Republic producing parts of our final season. And it was like our morning was like at a medieval village. And then, like, I think in the afternoon, we shot some stuff for German occupied France. And then the end of the night was the Czech Republic in the apocalypse in like the future or so. So it was just, you know, like from a sci-fi perspective, from a storytelling perspective, from a perspective of getting to try, you know, many different things and really pay homage to things that we grew up loving. It was great.
Well, coming out of a scrappy indie film perspective, where you produced, you know, movies in the desert, what were some of the things that you were able to take with you from the indie film experience into television?
You know, that was like the first thing, and that really carried through, I think, into Picard too, and which we could talk about. But on Monkeys, it was, you know, you know, our budget per episode was, you know, almost $3 million. The biggest budget I ever had was $150,000. So to me, that was astronomical. That's like, we could do anything. And I remember Terry, Travis, and Natalie in our first season of Monkey, they'd gone to Toronto to meet with production up there. And they came back, and they were so dispirited because they were like, they were basically told, we don't have enough money to make the show you want to make. And they just sort of knew, like, all these grand ambitions, all these really cool things we want to do weren't feasible. And a lot of it is true. And a lot of it also was, you know, they didn't have the sort of scrappy sensibilities that we had.
Right.
And we started to inject some of those things. And, you know, Terry and Travis, they've all made things on their own too. They know, like, how to get, you know, things done. And the first episode that I got sent to Toronto to produce in that first season was a massive, it had more scenes than any script we had written. It was just huge. And, you know, I get to our first big production meeting, and the first, you know, and I don't know any of these people. I'm just some annoying writer from LA who, like, just wants to make them work extra hard. And someone came up to me and it's like, great script. There's no way we could make it. And that was the first thing anyone ever said to me. And, you know, and so we started to get into it. And I was like, you know, this scene that you're thinking is like half a day. For me, it's one shot. We just need to see this. And, you know, we would sort of break it down like that. Like, this is how we achieve this in our sort of, in our lack of time and our lack of money. And we ended up getting all of it. And I think, you know, towards the end of the season, especially in season 2, I think they really started to trust us and understand, like, oh, you know, these guys have a vision for this thing, and they have a vision that's like responsible, and they can pull it off. And that's a show that looks like we had way more money than we did.
Right.
And that's just because we planned ahead. We always knew where we were going. You know, if we had an expensive location, it's like, let's, you know, every time we know we're going to come here this season, let's shoot it all together, you know? And so we did a lot of scrappy stuff. Like every cent that we had is on screen. And by the time, you know, like I said, that first season, it went from, we can't do this, to our last season, which was, and it was the same budget, and it was, don't worry, we'll figure it out. And so we just did, you know, the last season, especially, we were in the Czech Republic. We did this just huge thing, all these interesting time periods. We just became this unit that could just like, don't tell us no, we're going to figure it out. And, you know, Picard, you know, there was, and I don't know if Terry or anybody has mentioned this previously, but, you know, one of the mandates, you know, for the season was like, we need to get it closer to budget because it had gone over, you know,
right.
previously. And so, you know, that necessitated, like, we're going to be on the Titan a lot. We're going to, and we had to write, you know, to those limitations. And, you know, one of the things was that Terry had told, CBS and that I'm going to write, that we're going to do 40-page scripts. And, you know, so it's like, you know, that is for an hour show that is so tight. And so, and we kept to it. Every single one was 40 pages.
Wow.
And you'd sit there, you would write, and you were like, this one sentence is putting me over into page 41 territory. How do I say this better or more economically? But that was all part of, you know, that sense of discipline that we learned back on Monkeys. Like, if you want to do big storytelling, you got to do it responsibly. And, you know, so that's something I think that, you know, we all understood and were able to do together.
Well, to hear you say that, I mean, you know, I've been talking to a lot of people about, there was an article that Kim Masters wrote in the Hollywood Reporter about Amazon and how much money, like they spent $300 million to make 6 episodes that are 40 minutes long of The Citadel, the Russo brothers' new show that debuts at the end of the month. And I'm just like, I can't. One of the things that the legacy of Star Trek has in the original series and during the Berman era, Rick Berman never went over budget for a season because they would do a bottle show after to save money to do bigger stuff in various episodes. Whether they wanted to do a Yesterday's Enterprise, they would do a couple of bottle shows to pay for it. And the same was true of so one of the things I think was a genius thing in Terry's, in his conception of this season, is it's essentially a bottle season. You know, of course you go out, you have that beautiful Metalis set with the different zones, and but by setting it on the Titan, like you said, and keeping those scripts at 40 minutes or 40 pages, what you guys did was buy yourself the ability to make an epic story. You know, and you think back to some of the episodes of the original series. There's an episode called The Doomsday Machine, which is one of the great episodes of Star Trek, where they set it on another starship that's wrecked. It's a Constitution class ship, so they can use their sets, put a little debris in them, and suddenly you're on a second starship. And I thought that the conception of what you guys did, and it was genius in terms of coming down this way. And I think that having the indie sensibility that you guys have and cutting your teeth on 12 Monkeys turned the production of Picard season 3 into sort of a crack indie, but yet not indie because you have the money, but bringing all that together. Do you think that it's important for a television production team that's worked together in the past, you and Monfette and Terry and everybody else you brought in, how important do you think that is moving forward? Everyone's talking about cost cutting in the streaming era. Does having this kind of a close-knit team, because that's what people do on movies. Spielberg uses the same team. Filmmakers, Christopher Nolan uses the same collaborators. So my long question is, using your collaborators, how important do you think that was for you to be able to make the show that Picard season 3 has turned out to be?
Yeah, you know, it's you immediately have a shorthand, right? And you've already told that kind of storytelling before, and you know, Monkeys especially, we had many bottle episodes, and that got us, like you said, our bigger set pieces. I think it was kind of funny, and I ended up apologizing a lot because I didn't work on season 1 and season 2 of Picard. I came on season 3, and immediately, like Chris Terry and I and Casey, who had been a writer's assistant, had been an assistant on 12 Monkeys, and Oliver Grigsby, who was our script coordinator, had written for 12 Monkeys and been a script coordinator. And so immediately just have this like shorthand, and we're like, remember we did that thing, and like, we did the thing, and then and I think other people were like, what the hell are they talking about? Because it was, we had a certain rapport, and we had a way of doing that. So yeah, I think it's super important, and TV in itself is very collaborative. You lean on everybody at every moment, and everybody's contributing. So we did have a shorthand, but I think being the new guy, I really wanted to not make other people feel alienated. And so, but we put everybody to task, and it was a really great group of writers and people. And it had to be, because every day was a struggle.
Well, this episode, VOX, I think not only was it a tremendous episode of television, a tremendous episode of Star Trek, but it's probably going to go down as one of the more legendary episodes of Star Trek of all. There's been hundreds of episodes of Star Trek over the last 57 years. But man, this episode, like I said, I was a middle-aged man weeping at the end of it. And when you got assigned this episode, because we've talked about everybody in the past, how the writer's room works and how you break stories.
Yeah.
Did you ask to write this episode, or was it assigned to you? And did you, I mean, because, yeah.
Yeah, this is, I had sort of written a lot of the penultimates on 12 Monkeys. And so, and a lot of those were sort of set up as kind of like 2-part movies. So like season 2 was sort of like the episodes, at that point it was 12 and 13, and then we did 10, so it was 9 and 10. And in each of those I did 9, or I did 12. And so that was just a bit of kind of history there. And we'd been we'd had some success, and so yeah, I think I maybe part of it was just like, it's penultimate, maybe Sean, we'll have Sean do this. They're all they're all super important, and each for every great episode there's the great episode that sets it up. And we like episode 4 we got a lot of really wonderful praise about, and it really is like 3 and 4 that season are like a 2-parter as well.
Yes.
And I remember reading, people saying that they were upset that Picard and Riker were fighting and at odds in episode 3. And I'm just sitting going, just wait. It's like, you're upset about this now, but you're really going to be eating your words next week when you see how it comes together. And so so there are no ones that are more important or less important than the other, but, we are setting up, the finale. And, I think, all the little sacrifices we made along the way in terms of budgetarily and stuff like that, were so that 9 and 10 could be like a movie.
Right. Well, it was great at the end of 8, the briefing room scene that finally brings our entire crew together. The Next Generation crew's all in a room. Passing that off to episode 9, you now have all the Next Generation crew back together interacting. And I was curious, from a writing perspective, you're now writing for all of these characters. Like, every line of dialogue from all of these characters has to sound authentic. It has to sound, you've got all the way back to 1987 when Next Generation debuted. Was that intimidating for you, having to put words in the mouths of all of these characters?
It's definitely intimidating because you have this immediate fear of like, am I going to ruin this iconic thing, you know? And but they are iconic, and they have those characters in a way sometimes write themselves. And so because they're so well established and they're so, they're so zeitgeisty that you just like kind of have to shut your head off and like, what would they say? And then it comes to you. So it's like I said, it's less about us putting words in their mouth and more about like how organically are those characters gonna shine through. But it's tough, especially on a 40-page script. You want to give every one of those characters like all the breathing room and all the moments that you can, and that was always a very tricky balance of what's Data's big moment this episode, what's Riker's this one, and it was a little easier when we didn't have the whole band together and everybody's together, and it's like, how do we make everyone awesome?
Right.
And it was hard. It was really hard. Well, I know we're not going to talk about the finale, but that one, yeah, I'll leave it at that. I won't say more.
Well, it was you did get a lot of great lines. I mean, Data's got a great line about dying and his chair. And now, you were saying earlier before we started recording, you aren't necessarily some dyed-in-the-wool rabid Star Trek fan, are you?
Mm-hmm. I wasn't, and when Terry first asked me about Star Trek was kind of several months before I ended up joining, and I'd been on I was on Mayans, and I had to deal with 20th, and I was like, I can't, and I'm like, and I also just had that imposter syndrome of like, I've seen the big tentpole moments, I've seen all the movies, I've like, I get it, but I feel like you have to have that very deep thing. And he says, really, I just want to tell a great story. And that is something I felt like I understood. And he says, I want to get everybody back together. I want to give them the send off that they never got in the feature space. Like, I want to wrap everything together, and I really want to just present this love letter to these characters and the fans. And so that wasn't difficult to understand. And then by happenstance, I ended up getting offered a deal with CBS, and it was like, okay, great. You come to Star Trek tomorrow. And so like, I didn't know I had to deal with CBS, and then I had to deal with CBS. And I think the next day I was in the Picard room, and it was just crazy. And I came in and I wanted to be, obviously really respectful, of and I was like, I'm here, I'm going to listen, absorb. And we just were immediately thrown into like, no, season 3 starts now. Like, we got to have the first episode in 3 weeks or something. It was crazy. And so, we got thrown to the wolves, but the plan was, as I said, let's give these characters the send off that they never got, and let's stick to that. And that's not a hard road to deviate from. So, making something that we felt in our bones that people were going to love, that was our North Star. And so that's kind of, that was the plan we tried to execute here.
So when you were given the task of putting our cast members back on the bridge of the Enterprise D, you didn't necessarily, you weren't yourself as a writer weeping because you grew up with these characters. I mean, what was it like knowing that you were going to write that moment?
You cannot, there's no human being that can't stand. I was actually there for the very first moment that the actors came onto that set. I have it on my phone. It's been the hardest thing in the world not to show that to every single person I've met in the past year since, we did it. But none of them had seen the rebuilt set before. And they all came in to see it for the first time. And it's just beautiful. And everybody had tears in their eyes, and our production team had did such a an amazing job of, it's a work of art. Like you're staying in the thing, you're just like, you're in a work of art.
Right.
And so yeah, it's, you instantly get emotional. Like I watched that episode. I was there in that moment when they all walked onto it for the first time. I was there when we shot the stuff, and I get teary-eyed because you can't help but feel what that is.
Right. I mean, and it's, you know, Terry directed the episode, which is very cool. I even asked him, there's a great shot where the camera is pulling back as they're coming on the bridge, and it pulls back between the con and op station at the front. Yeah. And at the same time, the illumination of the bridge, it's becoming fully lit. And the camera movement, and it's a great shot that required a bit of coordination to pull off, but it really, and that particular shot, you can't help but, you know, get
it's my favorite moment of the entire season. And just being there on the day and seeing it shot live, it's just magic. And you just, you know, and this, I don't mean this to sound like egotistical, whatever, because, you know, this is the work of many, many, many people. But, you know, there was a point where we didn't know we could afford to rebuild that set. You know, there was a point where, like, budgetarily, it's like we may not be able to, and we really had to scrap. And it's really, you know, a lot of people did a lot of, you know, just went out of their way to make sure that, like, we were able to do that. And so it was just this tremendous reward for everyone. But just in the moment, you're standing next to the camera, you're looking at the monitor, you're seeing that, you know, big Technocrane pulled back like that, and you're just like, gold, you know. Like, it's just, you know, it's like, that's gonna blow people's minds. It's gonna pull at their heartstrings.
Oh, it does.
And it was, you know, we had really, like I said, we had the best intentions with this season, but we also had, you know, lived with this fear every day that we were going to screw it up, and that we weren't going to get, you know, be able to stick the landing, that we weren't going to, like, you know, it was like, if we could do all the things we want to do, it'll be great. Hopefully people think we're great, but there is a chance something could happen, another COVID shutdown, another, you know, whatever, and we may not get to tell this whole story. So late in the season, when we're filming it, like, we're done writing, although we were writing still on the last day to change things and stuff like that. But, you know, it's like moments like that, you're like, you start to see the finish line, and you're like, okay, we did it. Like, you know, it's going to work. It's going to work. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it really does. Now, I have to ask you, there's a couple of great one-liners. And there's, I've loved, like, throughout the series, there's the moment where, like, Ed Speleers is with Patrick Stewart in the 10 forward set, and he goes, let's talk about the elephant in the room, the hair.
Right.
You know, and this had a few of those moments. There's the great Picard speech when they get on the bridge, and he's talking about what he's missing, and then he says the carpet. And then Data's like, I hope we die soon, you know, or I die quickly, or whatever. And I'm curious when you write stuff like that, because that's, like, you're talking about brevity and you don't have the pages, but having those jokes that take a while to set up, they're pretty great. Yeah. Now, when you write when you write something like that, does it work? Do you have to approve that, or were those funny? Because I like those funny bits quite a bit. But what's it like to write them? Are you telling those things to each other in the room and seeing if it elicits a laugh?
We're telling each other those, you know, we're telling those jokes in the room, you know, and there's moments, and sometimes it's just you're writing a script and you get to a moment and you just need, like, God, I need some levity here. Like, I've been so heavy, like, it's been such doom and darkness and stuff like that. And so for me, that's what the Data line was. It was just like, how do we, you know, we've just lost Shaw. We've, you know, and we knew people were going to love Shaw. We love Shaw. Like, we love Shaw just conceptually, you know, and we knew Todd was going to be, you know, so it was just like, people are going to be upset. We better, you know. And I think the carpet thing was, like, we talked about in the room, because, you know, the the discussion of how to replicate the Enterprise D set was like, well, we got to do the carpet, you know, and so like it's just something that, you know, happens in there. And I think Kylie did the first pass of that scene where they came out and saw the thing, and she added the carpet line there.
And Kylie was another writer on the staff.
Yeah, yeah. And so you're constantly, you know, these things go through many drafts and versions and edits and you know, take things out and put it back in and stuff like that. But yeah, you have to have those, you know, those moments of levity and you know, not to, you know, like the Jack stuff. Like Jack stuff is a lot of fun. You know, the fun thing about, you know, Picard as a character is that, you know, he's such a regal character. He has, you know, such poise and such, you know, and it was always fun to kind of poke fun at that a little bit. And, you know, Jack was a great way to do that because he was not under that sort of, you know, delusion of greatness. He understood it, but he had sort of this chip on his shoulder. So he could say things to him like, you know, the hair, like, you know,
right.
And, you know, and that was another thing too. It's like, well, we know Patrick Stewart lost his hair very young. Do we need to cast an actor who lost his hair, you know, very young? Right. You know, those are things that, so just in general, it talks about characters and stuff like that. You know, there's those ideas, you know, are, you know, there, and then in the right moment, you pluck them out of the ether and you put it down on the page.
Since you brought it up, you knew you're going to kill Shaw. You had to put the man's last words. Was that something? Was it easy to write his last words, or was it something you struggled with? Did it take a while to get them right?
It was, you know, I've had the fortune and misfortune to kill Todd in several seasons of television. I killed him in 12 Monkeys, although he came back. And you know, and it's not my choice. It just so happens that, you know,
sure,
that you know, our design for the character ends on an episode I happen to be, you know, working on. And that one was tough because we knew Shaw's death was going to be a big moment, and our thing was like, let's write this character that everyone hates. And by the end of the season, everyone loves him. Like, let's see if we could do that. And who can pull it off? That's Todd, right? And so, so we knew he was going to die, and it was a big debate. I mean, there was, I think, some of us who argued like maybe he should die in 8, like maybe he should, you know, be the one who Vadic kills on the bridge, and you know, there was some talk, you know, about that, and we also just wanted to keep Todd around as long as we could. But that one was hard. You know, I remember, you know, in No Win Scenario, you know, we have the you know, Shaw monologue, which is you know, very similar to like the, you know, Robert Shaw's.
You're right. I noticed you're a Jaws fan. I can't help it.
No, yeah, it's not. There's I'm looking opposite here. Yeah. So
is the Kintner boy going to spill out all over your room there? They cut that.
Yes. That is actually there's an Tiger Shark to Bruce in an alt world where they caught him. But yeah, and so, you know, we knew that part of his backstory was going to be the whole you know, the whole thing with the Borg and him having that, you know, that bitterness, and then, you know, he was going to die, and it was like, it's kind of shitty that like he you know, had this, you know, situation with Borg, and then he ends up dying by the Borg. And, you know, we knew this moment was coming. And I remember working on that scene in 4, where he's at the bar and he's telling Picard about, you know, what happened to him. And I think originally a lot of, and I think, you know, Chris did a version of that scene, and I did a version, and Terry, you know, version, and very much like the Jaws, you know, monologue that like 6 people wrote.
Yeah.
History definitely repeated itself. But you know, it originally been that he had been, you know, extremely angry about, you know, the Borg, and had been traumatized, and it was more of like a, you know, like a revenge type thing, and was working on the scene. It's like, well, what is the thing about that made Shaw, right? And that's where we, added the thing where it was, his life was spared because someone had taken upon themselves to dictate orders and had ordered him to go in the life pod. And that was the reason why he became this, you follow orders. He became the rule follower. He became the stickler because that had saved his life and he felt he owed that. So almost like he owed sort of a life debt to someone in leadership giving orders. You're going to do this. You're going to, and so it's kind of like that moment. So although Shaw dies, I feel like there's a part of him that feels like he fulfilled that promise in that moment.
Yeah.
Of, I just ordered the rest of them onto that, escape pod, and they're going to go off and hopefully save the world, or the universe and galaxy. And that there is a cathartic moment to that. And the other big thing obviously is he always refused to call 7-7. And so this is the moment, and that's the moment just gets me, that, finally he says, 7, like, this is your ship. It's not my ship, it's yours. We knew, you start the season, you want to see 7 of 9 in that captain's chair. You just want it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
The moment, like in the first episode, when those doors open, I'm standing in uniform, like, that's a captain. So, but we're like, you want it so bad, you're going to have to earn it. And in terms of the audience and stuff like that. So, yeah, that was, it's a big moment. We wanted it to have, there's a lot happening in 9, whole fleet's being taken over. And so, it was like, when we get to it, we better have enough time to live in that moment with him. I think we could have lived longer. But we had our limitations in terms of time. Sure. But yeah, the last thing we want to do was shortchange Shaw's death.
One of the things I also really liked about this episode was the scene at the beginning with Ed Speleers and Marina Sirtis. You really gave Troy, sometimes, especially during the run of Next Generation, she was underwritten. I always felt that as a character. I always liked Marina as a presence, and I really liked the scene that you wrote in the beginning of this episode where she's really being a therapist. I mean, if you're a Beta Z and and I really enjoyed that. I thought you did a great job crafting that scene. What was it like to write that kind of a scene? It's because it's kind of weird. It's not real dialogue. She's saying things that might not necessarily. So was that a hard scene to craft, and did it take a while to get it right?
I think they all take a while to sort of craft and get right, but it's, that kind of thing, that metaphysical or being in that sort of mind space, was something that we did on 12 Monkeys a lot. So right. It was like going home a little bit, where it's like, you may be like, to someone who's never done something like that, like, well, it's like this, but she's there, but she's not really, and stuff like that. Like, we sort of just like, oh yeah, it's like a mind's eye thing. Got it, totally. It's like, it wasn't, yeah, but it is, those scenes are like a dance too, where it's like you're trying to say something while saying nothing, while building to, trying to build up tension to a moment to reveal. That was another one that was a big question that we kept going back and forth on, is like, should this be the end of episode 8? Because, conventionally a big like dun 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 moment like that, where it's like a kind of a cliffhanger-y thing, that comes at the end of an episode. And just structure like how we need to have it in 9. So it's like, we can't just drop it at the beginning of the episode. We got to build to it. It's like, how do we sort of seduce the audience into getting in that headspace of this feels like they've started watching this episode. They've only been watching it for 3 minutes, but they felt like they've been in this room with Ed and Marina for an hour, So I think it's a bit of that.
No, it was a really terrific scene. I really enjoyed that. Now, the other thing you got to do was write a little bit for an old adversary that comes back, you know, the Borg
Mhm.
Queen. And
Yeah.
that was when you guys were, like Terry had said early on, that from the beginning you knew where we were all going with that. Like it wasn't, and because you have to, the Batman has Joker and the Borg Queen.
Yeah.
The Borg
Yeah.
is Picard's big bad, whatever incarnation of the Borg there are.
Yeah.
Now, when you guys were coming up with, obviously the first 2 seasons of Picard, each they touch on the Borg. You had the Borg Queen, and well, you weren't there, but season 2 had a different Borg Queen and a whole different scenario. When you guys were crafting the idea of bringing the Borg Queen back, did you look to Voyager, the end of Voyager? How did you sort of craft where the Borg Queen came from and where it was going? Like, what was the evolution of that?
There was, it was, we knew we were going to do Borg from the very beginning. And we knew that, you know, this was kind of like the Sins of the Father season, you know, and that was going to be, you know, the story we're going to tell through Jack. And so, yeah, there was talk of, you know, a Voyager. There was talk of, like, you know, the first 2 seasons. At one point we were going to have a nod to sort of the Borgati thing, the Gerati Borg, you know, that was going to exist there, that is like, was like guarding a portal, and then the Borg cube giant one was going to come out and destroy it and stuff like that. And we thought, like, we didn't want to see like a slight on season 2. We were just like, this is like the last vestige of Prime Borg, right? So, you know, in talking about, you know, very specifically about Picard, the Borg being Picard's like white whales, it was more about like, what's the follow-up to Nemesis? That was really, I think, you know, what was the important thing is, like, you know, this is that, you know, he thought he defeated the Borg Queen, but like he didn't know that there was a long game that's been at play here for literally for generations, and he can't escape it. And I'm really excited for people to see how that plays out in the finale, but which we won't talk about. But yeah, it's, you know, you know, what there I think there was a little bit of concern of like, are we retreading by doing, you know, the Borg? And it's just like, that's Picard's story. That's his greatest trauma. That is the most significant portion. I think us going out on some other interplanetary conflict where we were going to, you know, sort of pull together many of his life experiences, I think would have rang false. It's got to be the Borg, you know, and so there wasn't much, you know, hesitation on that. And using the changelings in Vadic as a red herring was, you know, that was just baked into it too. So yeah, that was, you know, that was the, I'm not gonna say anymore because I'm gonna get into finale territory.
Yeah, sure. But it was really neat. I mean, I thought the revelation was very, very cool. You know, the last thing I wanted to touch on that I found very interesting was, obviously there is the idea that people 25 and under, Starfleet officers, are being, you know, they're being sort of, well, obviously assimilated in a different way. But was there any talk of that being political commentary of today? You know, I love Star Trek has always been allegorical, but the idea that young people are sort of being, you know, there's a lot of talk of collectivism lately, and were you guys making a meta commentary on the world today, or was that just because in real life people's brains are not, you know, when you're 25 they really stop developing? That's an actual physiological truth of the human animal. But it was also the way it played out. It was kind of neat. I mean, I'm like,
no, it was really a generational thing, like that, right? You know, like there's, you know, the words we threw around the most in this season were, you know, generation and legacy. You know, in the first episode, Picard says, "I'm not a man who needs a legacy," and then, you know, the whole, like, that's just there because, like, no, you're gonna get, like, we're going deep into that. So it wasn't a political commentary. If anything, we wanted to avoid that. We didn't want to say like, oh, the younger generation is weak or susceptible or anything like that. Right. It was absolutely the last thing we wanted to say. It was more it was more about, it's a season about families. It's a season about generations and children and parents and in those relationships, and that everyone has something to contribute. And you have these older officers that are coming on to the ship in the first episode, and everyone's like, oh, those old guys, and because that's what happens, right? Like everyone eventually, no matter how cool you are, no matter how important you are, eventually you become that old guy, and so I think it was, and that's just how time works. And we wanted to show that, but then throughout the season they all become a team. Like Sydney, LaForge has that great moment where where Geordi's says you're not your family, and she's like, yes they are. Like everyone on that ship, on the Titan, pulls it together and becomes a vital part. So we weren't trying to make a negative, if anything, it was about like, let's, like they came after Picard's child and now they're coming after your children, and we need to save everyone.
And I even loved Marina has that line on the bridge. She mentions Jack and Geordi's daughters as well, that they're part of the family. In case you didn't get that, she actually flat out just says it, which I thought that was a great moment. I really enjoyed that. Well, listen, I know that you have to depart. You're getting on a plane shortly. I want to thank you very much for giving us your time and speaking on this episode. I love this episode. I've loved this whole season. And I think, it's nice to see something that from its conception, the team came together and you actually accomplished in what you set out to do. And I think it shows in every frame of this season. It's a great season of television, a great season of Star Trek. And seeing the numbers come out today, it's in the top 10 streaming shows. It's Paramount Plus's first show in the top 10, I think. So that's pretty cool.
And I think it really just, it goes to, the fans who've just wanted to see the gang back together,
right.
and to recognizing like, we can come up with the coolest sci-fi twists and the headiest stuff we can, but ultimately these people become, part of our family, and these characters are, and we want to see, them together, and we want to see. And so, that was our goal. And to see, like today on Twitter, I was, looking at people, people are posting that they're watching it. A lot of it is like, I spent the last 10 minutes crying. And, that's what you want. You want to, like, there's enough terrible things in the world. Like, there's nothing wrong with, bringing some, joy and bringing some hope and bringing some, even in the midst of darkness that, happens in this episode. That's just great to see. And it's super fun.
Well, I want to thank you for being here. Thanks for being on the show. I very much appreciate your time. I know the people that watch the show will as well. What do you have coming up next? Is there anything you can talk about?
Ooh, I can't talk about. I'm adapting a novel from a very famous horror writer, and then I have a feature for New Line that is close to knock on wood, but they haven't been officially announced yet. So, but there's quite a bit cooking here. So I'm a busy and I'm a happy guy. So. Yeah.
Well, Sean Tretta, I want to thank you for being on the show. And boy, as a huge horror fan and a huge horror fiction fan, I look forward to finding out what it is you're doing. And congratulations on a wonderful season of Star Trek and all the work that you've done. And it's great to see the kind of team that Terry put together, and what a great production team can really do when they know what they're doing and they really have great leadership and great people like yourself who know what you're doing.
Thanks. You try. Sometimes, it's questionable, but yeah.
Thanks very much.